Human accepts alien girl as slave, instantly regrets it when the truth comes out. The deal was supposed to be simple. Kale had traded in dust, scraps, and promises for years, scraping by as a low-tier merchant along the outer rim of human-controlled space. He was used to crooked deals, half-broken cargo, and questionable clients. But this was different. The slaver had pushed forward a girl, barely clothed in tattered fabric, her wrists bound by thin metallic cuffs. Her skin shimmered faintly under the pale light of the docking bay, a shade of silver that no human had ever been born with. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't begging. She was simply watching him. "This will cover the debt," the slaver said, his voice rough like gravel. "Take her. She's obedient enough." Kale raised a brow. He wasn't in the business of buying slaves. It was risky, it was dirty, and, if the Terran Coalition inspectors ever caught him, he'd be rotting in a cell for decades. Still, the man owed him, and the ship repairs weren't cheap. He looked at her again. The girl's eyes glowed faintly with an inner light, a piercing shade of violet that seemed to cut through him. She didn't look broken like most of the slaves he'd seen pass through the markets. There was something unnervingly intact about her. "What's her name?" Kale asked. The slaver shrugged. "She won't say. Doesn't speak much. Calls herself Lyra, I think. Doesn't matter. She's yours now." Kale hesitated only a second longer. He signed the transaction, transferred the credits, and led her toward his ship. And in that moment, as the docking bay sealed behind them, Kale made the worst mistake of his life. Because Lyra was no ordinary slave. She was something far, far more dangerous. The Outer Rim colonies were a patchwork of half-legitimate settlements, mining hubs, and smuggling routes that stretched like a scar across the void. Humanity's reach had expanded far, but it had done so unevenly. The wealthy cores basked in glittering technology and well-regulated order. Out here, on the fringes, power belonged to whoever had the fastest ship, the biggest gun, or the cruelest leverage. Kale had carved a life on that edge. Not a glorious one, but enough to keep his ship, the Wanderer's Mercy, fueled and flying. He ferried goods that couldn't be sold openly, outlawed cybernetics, rare alien flora, and stolen ore. Most days it was lonely work, broken up only by haggling, blaster checks, and the occasional fight to keep what was his. Slavery, though, it was a line he had sworn not to cross. He'd seen what it did to people. He'd watched children torn from families, heard the screams behind market stalls. Even in the Rim, where the law bent under the weight of credits, there were some things Kale considered too dirty, too dangerous. So why had he accepted her? Maybe it was desperation. His reactor core had been failing for months, and without parts, he couldn't keep his ship spaceworthy. Maybe it was curiosity. Those violet eyes, that strange silver skin, the aura of someone who didn't belong in chains. Or maybe, deep down, he'd simply been too tired to fight the universe anymore. Lyra followed him wordlessly through the docking corridors. She didn't stumble. She didn't glance around with fear. Instead, her gaze swept across every detail, the guards, the security turrets, the flickering neon signs in alien script, as though she were memorizing it all. When they reached the Wanderer's Mercy, Kale unlocked the hatch and gestured her inside. The ship was small, patched with mismatched plates from years of hasty repairs, but it was home. "You'll stay in the crew quarters," he said. "Don't touch anything unless I tell you." Her voice was soft but firm when she finally spoke. "This ship is yours." Kale frowned. "Yeah. Why?" Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "It will do." Something about the way she said it unsettled him. Slaves didn't talk like that. Slaves didn't look at the rusted metal walls as if they were inspecting a throne room. Kale shook the thought away and started the engines. The stars stretched into streaks as they jumped into faster-than-light travel. For the moment, he told himself, she was just another piece of cargo. Nothing more. But in the quiet hum of the ship, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just invited a storm aboard. The galaxy wasn't unified, far from it. The Terran coalition ruled most of humanity, but countless alien empires sprawled beyond. Some traded peacefully, others demanded tribute, and a few hunted humans outright. Treaties kept the peace in core sectors, but on the fringes, deals were made in blood and betrayal. Rumors drifted constantly through spacer taverns, whispers of war brewing with the Vair Dominion, of assassinations in the Elythian court, of an unnamed princess gone missing from one of the wealthiest alien dynasties. But rumors were cheap in the rim. Kale had learned long ago not to believe them. The one thing he did believe was this: out here, nobody gave you something for free. And if a slaver had given him this girl so easily, there had to be a reason. Lyra sat silently on the crew bench as the ship slipped through the void. She carried herself with a stillness that didn't belong to a slave. No twitch of nerves, no slouch of defeat. Her back was straight, her chin lifted. She looked like someone used to command, not captivity. Kale stole glances as he checked the navigation charts. She noticed, of course. "Why do you look at me that way?" she asked suddenly. He nearly dropped the data pad. "What way?" "Like you expect me to break." Kale swallowed. "Because that's what happens to people in chains." Her eyes flickered, sharp and unreadable. "Then perhaps you have not seen enough." The word sent a chill down his spine. For the first time in years, Kale found himself wishing he'd walked away from a deal. The Wanderer's Mercy drifted through the silence of slipstream travel. Inside the ship, the hum of the reactor was the only heartbeat Kale trusted. But now there was another presence aboard, one he wasn't used to, the girl sitting quietly in the corner of his crew quarters, her violet eyes unblinking, her posture still too perfect. Kale busied himself with routine tasks, checking cargo locks, running diagnostics, pretending not to notice the weight of her gaze. He'd ferried passengers before, smugglers and fugitives, even a mercenary squad once, but never a slave. And never one who made him feel like he was the one being observed. Finally, he broke the silence. "You hungry?" She tilted her head. "For what?" Kale blinked. "Food. Rations. I've got standard packs." He tossed one toward her, compressed protein wrapped in plastfilm, the kind that tasted like chalk no matter how you heated it. Lyra caught it without even looking at the arc of the package. Her movements were quick, precise, too precise. She studied the ration bar as though it were a puzzle. Then, with an almost delicate disdain, she set it aside. "This is not food," she said simply. Kale's brow furrowed. "It's what keeps you alive. Trust me, I've lived off this stuff for years." "Then your species accepts survival as suffering." Her tone wasn't mocking. It was matter of fact, almost clinical. Kale felt irritation rise, but he forced a shrug. "Out here, we eat what we can get. You'll learn." Lyra didn't argue further. She only sat back, her expression unreadable. But Kale couldn't shake the thought that she had tasted something far finer before, and that she expected it again. Over the next few days, Kale tried to ignore her. He focused on trading routes, scanning reports for potential buyers, and making sure the Mercy wouldn't fall apart mid-flight. But Lyra's presence was like gravity, inescapable. She wandered the ship without permission, her bare feet silent against the metal floors. She studied every panel, every screen, as though memorizing its functions. Once, Kale caught her in the engine bay, her fingers tracing the reactor housing. "Hey," he snapped. "Don't touch that. You'll fry yourself, or worse, fry my ship." Lyra turned, unbothered. "This reactor is unstable. The core shielding is cracked." Kale froze. He hadn't told her that. Only he knew about the hairline fracture that had been bleeding energy for months. How how do you know that? She didn't answer. She only walked past him, as though the conversation were over. By the fourth day, Cale decided he needed to reassert control. She was property, after all, at least in the eyes of the deal he'd made. If he let her roam unchecked, she'd tear his authority apart. He found her in the galley, sitting with that same infuriating calm. "All right," he said, planting his hands on the table. "We need rules. You don't touch the engines. You don't touch the NAV systems. You don't wander without asking me first. Got it?" Lyra met his glare without flinching. "And if I do?" Cale blinked. "Then you'll regret it." A faint smile touched her lips, not amusement, but something colder, sharper. "No," she said softly. "You will." The words rattled him more than he wanted to admit. Later that night, Cale checked the ship's logs and nearly dropped his datapad. Navigation entries had been altered, subtly, almost invisibly. Their course was no longer set toward the trade hub of Rinport, but toward an unmarked system deeper in alien territory. He stormed into the crew quarters. "What did you do to my charts?" Lyra looked up from where she sat cross-legged, eyes calm. "Your destination was inefficient. The route I set will bring greater profit." Cale's fists tightened. "You hacked my ship's systems." "Hacked?" She tilted her head. "I simply corrected them." "You can't just," he stopped himself. He was about to lecture a slave about navigation, but the truth was gnawing at him, she'd done it cleaner than he ever could. Lyra's gaze softened, not with kindness, but with something closer to pity. "You think you own me. Yet already I command your path." Cale didn't sleep that night. Despite himself, Cale began to notice the advantages of her presence. When they stopped briefly at a fuel station, Lyra negotiated with the dockmaster in flawless Varen, shaving 50 credits off the price. When Cale tried to argue with a merchant over spare parts, Lyra leaned forward, said 3 quiet words in an alien tongue, and the man backed down instantly, pale as a ghost. Who was she, really? Slaves weren't educated. They weren't multilingual. They didn't carry themselves like soldiers and diplomats rolled into one. Each time Cale looked at her, the unease grew. He had expected chains and silence, but instead he had brought aboard someone who seemed to be silently judging him, and perhaps, waiting for the right moment to reveal her hand. For the first time in years, Cale wished for the dull company of cargo crates. At least the crates didn't stare into your soul. Cale had always trusted space to be predictable. Engines hum, stars blur into streaks, trade routes curve along known maps. People, however, were unpredictable. And the girl, Lyra, was the most unpredictable factor he'd ever brought aboard. Every day, she unsettled him in new ways. She moved like she'd been born in zero gravity, gliding effortlessly through narrow corridors. She spoke to him in common, but sometimes muttered to herself in languages Cale couldn't even identify. And every so often, when she thought he wasn't looking, her eyes glimmered brighter than before, violet sparks dancing like tiny stars in her pupils. Cale told himself it was nothing. Stress. Poor lighting. His mind is inventing patterns. But deep down, he knew he was lying to himself. It came to a head on a dusty refueling station orbiting a nameless moon. Cale had docked the Mercy for supplies, planning a quick in and out. Lyra followed him despite his order to stay aboard. The hangar was full of rough types, mercenaries, smugglers, scavengers. When they noticed Lyra trailing behind him, more than a few pairs of eyes lingered too long. One man stepped forward, blocking their path. "Didn't know you were in the trade, Cale," the man sneered. "Is she for sale?" Cale's jaw tightened. "She's not on the market." The man chuckled and reached for Lyra's arm. "Shame. She'd fetch a high price." Before Cale could react, Lyra moved. It was a blur. 1 second she stood still, the next she had twisted the man's wrist and driven him to his knees with surgical precision. No wasted effort, no hesitation. The mercenary howled, his weapon clattering to the ground. The hanger fell silent. Cale grabbed her arm, yanking her close. "What the hell was that?" he hissed. Lyra's expression didn't waver. "He touched me without consent." "That's not the point." Cale snapped, dragging her back toward the ship. "Slaves don't fight like that." "Not unless," he stopped himself, realizing he didn't have an answer. She glanced at him with those unreadable eyes. "Then perhaps I am not what you think." Back aboard the Mercy, Cale paced the cockpit while Lyra sat calmly, as though nothing had happened. "You've been hiding something from me," he accused. "Who taught you to fight like that? Where'd you learn to speak half the galaxy's languages? Why do you know more about my ship than I do?" Lyra folded her hands in her lap. "You ask many questions, but you are not ready for answers." Cale slammed a fist against the console. "Don't play games with me. If someone finds out I've got you aboard, I could be executed. The Coalition doesn't take kindly to unlicensed slaves." Her gaze flickered, sharp as a blade. "You fear them. You fear everyone. And yet, you fear me most of all." The silence stretched between them. Cale realized she was right. That night, Cale awoke to the sound of soft murmuring. He crept from his cabin and found Lyra in the engine bay, her hands hovering just above the reactor core. She wasn't touching it, yet the control lights flickered in response to her presence. "Stop," Cale ordered, his voice low. Lyra turned, her expression serene. "The shielding is worse than you realize. If left unchecked, it will fail within a month. I stabilized it, for now." Cale gaped at her. "How do you know that?" Her answer was simple, chilling. "Because I was raised among stars older than your species. Machines speak, if you know how to listen." Cale's skin prickled. She wasn't bluffing. Somehow, impossibly, she'd interfaced with the reactor without tools, without even touching it. And she looked at him not with pride, but with disappointment, like a teacher watching a child struggle with basic arithmetic. The next day, while they ate in silence, Cale tried a different approach. "Lyra," he said carefully. "Where are you from?" She chewed slowly before answering. "Far from here." "That's not an answer. It is the only one you deserve right now." Cale's patience frayed. "Look, if you're some kind of runaway noble or a fugitive, I need to know. Because the last thing I want is half the galaxy's bounty hunters crawling after my ship." Lyra set down her cup, her violet eyes locking onto his. For a heartbeat, Cale thought she might tell him the truth. But then she smiled faintly, an enigmatic curve of lips that held no warmth. "When the time comes, Cale, you will know. But be careful what you wish for. Truth is heavier than chains." Her words lingered long after she left the galley. A week later, Cale intercepted a scrambled transmission on the emergency channels. The message was fragmented, but one phrase repeated clearly: "Missing royal asset, last seen in the outer rim. All contractors are authorized to retrieve, dead or alive." Cale froze. Royal asset. The words echoed like thunder. He glanced toward the crew quarters, where Lyra sat in meditation, her eyes closed. Pieces began snapping together. Her regal posture. Her disdain for rationing food. Her fluency in half the galaxy's languages. The way even hardened smugglers hesitated when she spoke. She wasn't a slave at all. She was something else, something far more dangerous. And Cale realized, with a sick twist in his gut, that by accepting her, he hadn't just broken the law. He might have placed himself in the middle of an interstellar war. That night, Cale dreamed of being hunted, faceless soldiers marching through fire, their weapons raised at him, violet eyes watching from the shadows. When he awoke, Lyra stood at his door, silent as a ghost. You heard the transmission, she said. It wasn't a question. Kale's mouth went dry. Who are you? Lyra stepped closer, her gaze burning with quiet intensity. Someone you were never meant to possess. Someone whose truth will decide whether you live or die. Kale swallowed hard, realizing too late that the storm he feared wasn't coming from outside. It was already aboard his ship. Kale had been on edge ever since the transmission. Every docking request, every blip on the radar felt like it carried a hidden threat. His instincts screamed at him to dump Lyra at the nearest port and vanish before the storm broke. But some part of him, maybe curiosity, maybe fear, kept him tethered to her. The storm came sooner than expected. They were halfway through a jump corridor when the ship's alarms wailed. Kale bolted to the cockpit. 3 ships had dropped out of slipstream behind them, sleek hunters, bristling with weaponry. Unregistered vessel, came a harsh voice over comms. Power down engines and prepare to be boarded. Hand over the passenger, and you may live. Kale's blood ran cold. They weren't here for him. They were here for her. He glanced over his shoulder. Lyra stood in the doorway, calm as ever, her silver skin glowing faintly in the dim light. They found me, she said softly. Kale's hands tightened on the controls. You mean, they were looking for you? Lyra gave a single nod. Yes. Kale tried evasive maneuvers, but the hunters herded him with surgical precision. Within minutes, grappling clamps latched onto the Mercy, dragging her into submission. The ship shuddered as boarding tubes latched onto the hull. Kale cursed under his breath, grabbing a blaster from the weapons locker. He turned to Lyra. Stay behind me. If they want you, they'll have to go through me first. To his shock, she almost laughed, a quiet, bitter sound. You think you can protect me? Before he could reply, the airlock hissed open. A squad of armored figures stormed inside, rifles raised. Their leader stepped forward, helmet reflecting the cockpit lights. Hand her over, the leader barked. Do it now, and we'll spare your miserable life. Kale positioned himself between them and Lyra, blaster trembling in his grip. She's under my protection. You'll have to kill me first. The bounty hunters raised their weapons. And then Lyra spoke. Stand down. Her voice wasn't loud. It wasn't desperate. But it carried a weight that shook the room. The hunters froze, their weapons wavering. Kale blinked in disbelief. She wasn't begging for mercy, she was commanding them. One of the soldiers dropped his rifle. Another staggered back as if invisible hands pressed against his chest. The leader's helmet cracked, sparks flickering as if some unseen energy fried his systems. What are you? Kale whispered. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes blazing with violet light. The aura around her shimmered, a faint field of energy bending the air. I am not yours, she said, her voice resonant, layered with something inhuman. I was never a slave. I am Lyra of the Elythian crown, first daughter of the imperial line, heir to the celestial throne. And you, her gaze swept across the trembling soldiers. You dare to treat me as cargo. The bounty hunters faltered, fear rippling through their ranks. A few scrambled back toward the airlock. The leader collapsed to his knees, helmet smoking. Kale's blaster lowered slowly, his mind reeling. A princess. An alien princess. He'd accepted her as payment like a common slave, and now he realized she held power beyond anything he could comprehend. Kale staggered back, trying to process. You're royalty. You're worth more than my entire ship, more than every ship in this sector. Lyra turned her glowing gaze on him. For the first time, Kale felt truly small. I warned you, Kale. You did not purchase me. You bound yourself to me. By accepting me, you accepted responsibility for what follows. Kale shook his head. I didn't know. I thought you were just Her expression hardened. A slave? Property? Do you understand now the weight of your ignorance? The word stung. He opened his mouth to protest, but nothing came out. Because she was right, he had accepted her without question, without caring who she truly was. And now, the consequences loomed larger than he could handle. The remaining bounty hunters fled back to their ships, leaving the Mercy scarred but intact. Silence filled the corridors once more. Kale leaned against the bulkhead, still shaking. So, what happens now? Are you going to kill me for what I did? Lyra's eyes dimmed back to their usual glow, though the regal weight in her posture never faded. She studied him for a long moment. No. If I wished you dead, you would already be ash. But you have seen the truth, and now you cannot walk away from it. The hunters will keep coming. The coalition will brand you a traitor. Every system you enter will place you in danger. Kale swallowed hard. Because of you. Because of me, she agreed. Then, more softly, but also because of the choice you made. You took me aboard. And now, Kale, your fate is tied to mine. The bounty hunters were gone, but the echoes of their boots still haunted the corridors. Kale sat slumped in a cockpit chair, staring at the black canvas of space outside the viewport. His hands shook as he tried to steady his breathing. A princess. An alien princess. He'd thought he was desperate enough to accept a slave as payment. Instead, he'd chained himself to someone whose very existence could topple governments. You should have told me, Kale muttered, voice raw. Behind him, Lyra stood tall, her arms folded with practiced poise. Would you have believed me? Or would you have sold me for the highest price, like so many others tried? Kale turned, anger and fear boiling together. You don't know me. Her violet eyes locked onto his. I know enough. You survive by trading in shadows, skirting laws when convenient, obeying them when necessary. You think yourself free, but you are as bound as any slave. The words cut deeper than he wanted to admit. Kale rubbed his temples. You don't get it. If the coalition finds out I had you aboard, I'm finished. They'll brand me a traitor, say I collaborated with enemy royalty. That's a death sentence. Lyra tilted her head, expression unreadable. Then you must decide if your life is worth the risk. Kale barked a hollow laugh. Decide? You make it sound simple. Every bounty hunter in this quadrant will be after us now. You've put a target on my back the size of a moon. Her voice softened, almost, sympathetic. No, Kale. You put the target on your back the moment you accepted me. The truth landed like a punch. He had chosen this, whether he'd realized it or not. And now the galaxy would never let him forget it. Lyra stepped closer, her presence filling the cockpit with an aura of quiet authority. I could end this for you, she said. Erase your name, your ship, your very existence from the hunt. All it would take is one word. Kale stiffened. What's the catch? Her lips curved into that faint, enigmatic smile. Loyalty. Swear yourself to me. Serve me, not as master to slave, but as ally to heir. Stand at my side when the time comes, and I will protect you. Kale stared, stunned. You're asking me to join you? After everything? After I treated you like property? Lyra finished for him. Yes. And still, I offer you more than you deserve. Because you are useful, Kale. And because, despite your flaws, you are not without courage. He swallowed hard. And if I say no? Her violet eyes glowed faintly. Then your usefulness ends. And your life with it. Kale's mind raced. On one hand, survival. If he ditched her, maybe he could run far enough, hide deep enough, disappear into the galaxy's cracks. But no matter how far he ran, he knew hunters would find him. the coalition would find him. On the other hand, loyalty to a princess of an alien empire. A life tangled in politics, danger, and wars far beyond his small smuggling runs. Freedom or servitude. Safety or annihilation. Except neither option truly promised safety. Kale met her gaze. If I say yes, what exactly am I agreeing to? Lyra's voice carried the weight of stars. To stand beside me when I reclaim what is mine. To carry the burden of my truth, even when it endangers you. To accept that your life is no longer your own, but tied to mine. Kale let out a slow, shaky breath. Sounds a lot like being a slave again. Only this time, I'm the one in chains. Her expression softened, just barely. No, Kale. This time, you choose the chains. The silence stretched, heavy as lead. Kale felt the weight of the galaxy pressing down on him. His freedom had been an illusion anyway. Out here, survival always meant bowing to someone stronger. Maybe choosing her was better than being hunted by everyone else. Finally, he nodded. Fine. I'll stand with you. But don't expect me to bow or call you, Your Highness. Lyra's smile widened, not mockery, but something colder, sharper. I expect only loyalty. Respect will come in time. Kale muttered, we'll see about that. But even as the words left his lips, he felt something shift in the air, a bond forged not by contracts or chains, but by choice. Fragile. Dangerous. Unbreakable. Kale had traded in cargo, lies, and scraps his whole life. But this was different. He had traded his freedom for survival, his soul for a chance to live. And as Lyra turned her gaze toward the stars, Kale realized he had just sworn himself to something far greater, and far deadlier, than he could understand. The stars stretched endlessly before them, but Kale couldn't shake the weight in his chest. Every breath reminded him that he had just bound himself to an alien princess, an heir to a throne he couldn't even imagine. He thought the worst was behind him. But Lyra wasn't finished. Come, she said, rising from her seat. It is time you saw why they fear me. Kale hesitated, then followed her to the observation deck, a narrow chamber with a wide viewport that opened to the void. Lyra stepped to the glass, placing her hands lightly against it. Her violet eyes began to glow, brighter and brighter, until the room was bathed in their light. At first, Kale thought it was a trick of the sensors. But then the stars themselves seemed to bend, faint trails of energy spiraling toward her like invisible rivers. The ship's systems flickered, panels humming with sudden power. What are you doing? Kale stammered. Calling, she whispered. Reaching out across the dark. The void pulsed, and Kale's stomach dropped. He felt it, not just saw it, but felt it, a wave of pressure, as if space itself bowed to her will. The ship, his ship, responded like a loyal hound to its master. The cracked reactor stabilized. The engines purred with new strength. Kale stumbled back, eyes wide. You can control all of this. Lyra turned, her glow dimming but not vanishing. Not control. Command. The Elythian bloodline was born to rule, and the stars themselves recognize it. That is why they hunt me. That is why I cannot be allowed to fall into chains. Kale's throat went dry. Then why trust me? I'm no soldier, no kingmaker. I'm just a man trying to survive. Lyra stepped closer, and for the first time her gaze softened, not regal, not commanding, but almost human. Because survival is exactly what I need. Empires collapse when rulers grow complacent. You know how to claw life from the dirt. You know what it means to lose everything and still keep moving. That is why you are mine now, Kale. Her words were quiet, but they echoed louder than any gunfire. Kale looked at her, the girl he had accepted as nothing more than a slave, and realized the truth. He had chained himself not to weakness, but to a force that could shake the galaxy. The ship's sensors blared, snapping him from his thoughts. Kale rushed to the console. Dozens of signals appeared on the edge of the system, warships, sleek and massive, cutting through the dark like predators. Lyra's expression didn't falter. She gazed at the display with calm certainty. They have come for me. Kale's hands trembled on the controls. There's a whole fleet out there. We can't fight that. We'll be dust. Lyra's eyes gleamed, brighter than ever. You are wrong. They cannot fight me. And with a single raised hand, she reached once more for the stars. The viewport flooded with light. Energy surged through the Wanderer's mercy, more power than Kale had ever dreamed possible. He shielded his eyes, heart pounding, as reality itself seemed to bend around her. And in that blinding moment, Kale understood, he hadn't accepted a slave. He hadn't even accepted a princess. He had accepted a queen.